In this Remnant 2 video, I'll be showcasing my Engineer and Summoner archetype build. This build is extremely efficient at allowing your summons to clear mobs and provide you the survivability to endure Apocalypse difficulty. Before we look at this build, if you would go ahead and click that like and subscribe button, it greatly helps the channel and truly means the most. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The Engineer is an archetype that specializes in carrying and deploying heavy weaponry. On this build, we're using the heavy weapon Vulcan skill. This is an automatic turret and is crucial to the damage output on this build. By using the Engineer archetype, you increase your skill damage by 50% and skill critical chance by 10%. This damage buff applies to both your Engineer turrets and your Summoner minions, which we will talk about more later. You should slot the Engineer as your primary archetype. This allows the perk High Tech. By holding the skill button, you overclock your carried or deployed heavy weapon, granting infinite ammo, increased fire rate, and 25% damage increase for 25 seconds. This perk has a 46-second cooldown, making it usable in almost every encounter. In order to acquire the Engineer archetype, you'll need to search for the alien device found outside the toxic border on Nerude. The two areas that will spawn this item are the Eon Vault and the Timeless Horizon. Bring this back to Ward 13 to craft the Engram. The Summoner is an archetype that specializes in commanding minions. On this build, we're using the Flyer minion. I will sometimes switch to the Reaver minion, however this ultimately comes down to your preference. By using the Summoner archetype, you increase your mod and skill damage by 35% and mod and skill critical chance by 5% while a minion is active. Again, this buff will apply to both your Summoner minions and your Engineer turrets. I know some builds will primarily slot their Summoner archetype in order to increase minion damage, however I believe the Engineer primary perk is too good to pass up. In order to acquire the Summoner archetype, you will need to craft the Fated Grimoire at the Blood Moon altar on Yesha. The required crafting material will also drop on Yesha from Root Wisp during the Blood Moon. The Blackmaw AR-47 is a fully automatic rifle with a medium magazine capacity. This weapon can be bought from Brabus at Ward 13. For our weapon mod, we're using Space Crabs. These little guys will seek out enemies, latch onto them, and explode. For our weapon mutator, we're using Harmonizer. This mutator increases all of our mod damage by 20%, and at level 10 will generate 25% more additional mod power for stowed weapons. The Labyrinth Staff is a melee weapon in which basic attacks generate 10% and charge generate 50% additional mod power. For our weapon mutator, we're using Steadfast, as it makes our charged attacks uninterruptible. This weapon can be found in the Labyrinth just after defeating the Bastion mini-boss. The Double Barrel is a weapon that can deal massive damage at close range. This weapon can be found on Lossum, Morrow Parish, inside the Iron Safe. For our weapon mod, we're using Root Lash. This ability summons root tentacles that will spawn from the ground and attack enemies. For our weapon mutator, we're using Feedback. This mutator generates mod power every time the weapon's mod is used. At level 10, mod damage will generate 10% of the damage dealt as mod power. Honestly, the specific weapons you choose will not make or break the build. However, the weapon mods and mutators are important. It is also worth mentioning that although the weapons themselves are not important, upgrading them is. Your weapon mods will scale based on the upgrade level of your weapon. For this build, we're running the Knotted set. Just like my last build, this armor is for purely aesthetic reasons. It's also not a hard set to grind for, as you'll need to get it from the same place as you'll be getting your Summoner archetype. I'm sure there exists plenty of better options in this category, but as an old school Dark Souls fan, I gotta have my fashion. For our amulet, we're using the Jester's Bell. This amulet increases mod and skill cast speed by 35%. Also, casting a mod or skill increases all damage by 20% for 15 seconds. With this build, you are constantly either summoning through your minions, turrets, or your weapon mods. When testing this build, I kept an eye out for uptime on this amulet, but after a while I realized this buff was constantly active. The Jester's Bell can be found in Lossum in the Palace when you encounter the Juggling Jester who gives you the magic quill. Perform the clap emote after his act to receive this amulet. In our first ring slot, we're using Soul Link. This ring allows summons to lifesteal 5% of the base damage they deal, returning it to the user. In our second ring slot, we're using Soul Guard. This ring grants 1 stack of Bulwark for each active summon. If you are not running this ring combo, then you're missing out on much of the synergy this build offers. This is the combo that will keep you alive in higher difficulties. Soul Link is a random drop on Yesha, and Soul Guard can be purchased from the Blood Altar on Yesha. In our third ring slot, we're using the Stone of Balance. This ring increases all damage by 7%. While I am happy with this choice, I think the Burden of the Destroyer is a good swap for this ring. However, I can't seem to get cast to sell it in Ward 13. The Stone of Balance can be found on Yesha. In our 4th ring slot, we're using Anastasia's Inspiration. This ring grants haste for 10 seconds after you receive healing. Since the passives on this build constantly heal you, you will always have haste. This ring is somewhat optional. I know some players will recommend the Burden of the Divine so that you can heal your summons. I've tried both, but I prefer this option instead. Anastasia's Inspiration can be found on Root Earth and also purchased from Whispers in Ward 13. For our traits, we have 10 points in the following categories: Fortify for armor effectiveness, Regrowth for health generation, Vigor for HP, Endurance for stamina, Spirit for mod power generation, Expertise for skill cooldown, Bark Skin for damage reduction, Rugged for summon health, and Blood Bond for summon damage absorption. I flipped between a few different relics in this build, but the one I ended up going with was the Resonating Heart due to its bonus from Overheal. Even on Apocalypse difficulty, you will find yourself full HP, allowing this effect to proc. As for the fragments, we're going to go with the fragments that increase health, reduce skill cooldown, and increase skill damage. The Resonating Heart can be found on Root Earth. Different people will play this build in various ways. If I want a build that will always be actively participating in the fight, I would go with my Gunslinger Hunter build. In a Summoner class, I want the minions to do most, if not all, the work. I really try to focus on positioning and force engagements where my minions are at the advantage. Thanks for watching this video. I have a build for the Hunter Gunslinger archetype uploaded onto this channel. If you haven't already seen it, I highly suggest checking it out after this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. I have more Remnant 2 build videos on the way that you don't want to miss. Until then, take care.